All right, very happy now to be joined by Newburyport City Councilor at Large, Afroz Khan. And Afroz, welcome back to MSO. It's been several years.
It has indeed. Thank you so much for having me back. We were, I think, in the start of the pandemic when I was last.
That's right. And great to meet you. I was engineering before when you talked with Josh Arnold. I'm changing now. And speaking of the pandemic, it's been 3 years. We're on the way out of it, more or less. What's the general feeling, mood, business atmosphere in Newburyport right now? Because I haven't been able to connect with anybody in Newburyport recently. So, by the way, thank you very much for doing this for us. But what's the overall general view?
There's a view of optimism. There's a view of just enjoying being outside, being gathering again. You know, Newburyport has a very vibrant downtown. And anytime you go, even if the weather is even in the 30s or 20s, you see people outside still gathering and going into our restaurants, to our shopping at the stores. I always have a hard time finding parking. So that's how I know that there is a lot of still activity. So I would say it's a very optimistic, exciting time. And we've seen a lot of new businesses come too, which is always what you worry about. We did see, unfortunately, some businesses closed down, but they were followed by some additional new places coming in. So I would say it's been, can't believe it's been 3 years, but I feel like it's been a big journey and lesson learned as a local elected representative on navigating and being with the public and helping them through this.
Well, so much has changed, and some for the good. One of them is the fact that I can do a lot of these interviews remotely now, instead of having to travel all the way up to Newburyport from Gloucester. But in general, you are now in your second mayoral administration as a city councilor. And what was the transition like from Mayor Holliday now over to Mayor Reardon?
Oh, that's a really good question. So yeah, when my term started, that also started with a new mayor and also some new councilors. And the transition, I have to say, given the fact that our current mayor, Mayor Reardon, was also a school committee member, and I had worked with him when he was on the school committee, as I was on a joint committee between councilors and school committee members. It was someone who at least knows us and knows the city council and worked with city council before. So I would say the transition was actually pretty seamless in the sense of just kind of keeping the same issues going on, the same business items, and now just maybe having someone else with a new angle of dealing with it. So I feel like, you know, there's obviously some lessons learned on both sides. I think we, unfortunately, this term really had to peruse our charter because, you know, there's going to be a natural turnover in some of the departments and department heads. And the mayor does have a plan right now to actually move our parks department under the Department of Public Works, which is a significant change. And I would say a bold one that the mayor is going to be doing. And we currently have that as one of the items we're going to be talking about. We have to do a public hearing. The charter has a very specific process. An administrator or mayor cannot just come and move a complete department under another department. Our charter has a process where we have a public hearing and then the council gets a plan, and then that plan has to be approved by the council. So there's been a few kind of new things, I think, happening as well. So maybe that's, while the transition was seamless, there are obviously some things that are going to be happening that the new administration probably wants to see and feel like it'll be better for the city.
I read an editorial in the Newburyport Daily News from Dave Rogers, I think it was yesterday, and from an outsider looking in, it looks like there's a few points of contention in terms of city council topics, and maybe you could bring me up to speed on a couple of those.
Well, yes, and I have to tell you that it's been, I will say our news is more entertaining than informational lately, but you know, hey, I won't beat around the bush. I do think that many of us feel very passionate about certain aspects of what we want to get done. And sometimes that passion does come out to become in a very, in an area where we should be debating it and discussing it. Sometimes I feel like we get a little bit too impassioned and start, I think we just have to remember and be mindful of how we conduct ourselves in the public realm. And I think what you're referring to has a lot to do with a piece of property that the city acquired finally, and the desire for a designated youth services center. And philosophically, I will say in my research of looking at other municipalities, not many of them have a dedicated youth services center. And so I believe what ends up happening is there's always this trying to understand, the schools get 60% of our budget. The kids have a new school building that we have for our elementary at the Bresnahan, which we actually did a debt exclusion. So we went to the voters and approved. And there's this kind of understanding from those who don't have kids in the school system. Well, why do we need a building that could cost $5 million, $8 million? Why would we want that for our kids when we have parks, and we have many of parks? We have fields, we have gym space at the school. Why do we need to do this? And I think it's a philosophical question that I'm very passionate that we do need to have a youth services center. I've seen during the pandemic especially, but I've seen kids who've been on the fringe, or kids who don't have maybe a sport activity to go to right after school. You see kids walking downtown and just kind of sitting around, and you want to see them kind of in a environment where they can be with their peers or be in a safe spot where they can hang out. And to me, it's got to be the wave of the future. I think our kids are going through so much. We went through a lot as well, but the things that the kids today are kind of facing, and I think social media has some of it to do with it. But I also think there's a lot of overload of things and information and things thrown at them, that to me, it's even more important to have safe spaces for our kids. So I'm very strongly advocating for a youth services center. But that editorial kind of, I think, was talking a little bit about how do we get there, and some disagreement from some of my colleagues on the council.
Well, it sounds better when you talk with someone rather than reading it in print from an outsider's viewpoint. And I must tell you, many decades ago, when I was preteen and a teenager, my dad was in the Army. We lived on American housing in Gelnhausen, Germany. And in fact, excuse me, in that housing area, there were probably 10 or 11 apartment complexes with 20 or 30 apartments in each building, and a lot of kids there. And we did have a dedicated youth center. And I remember going to that, how great it was to be able to do that. All kinds of things, music, pool table, games, things like that.
Wow.
And it was really something. I forgot about that until you mentioned that. So
Yeah.
good luck with that.
Thank you. It's going to be, keep reading the paper. You'll get
Yeah, okay.
one angle on it.
All right, a couple of other topics that City Council is working on right now. And what's this about short-term rentals? What's going on there?
Yes. Oh boy. Okay. So that's a loaded one there. Right now, as you might know about Newburyport, we don't really have a large hotel. We have a few smaller bed and breakfast and kind of quaint little inns, but we don't have a hotel in Newburyport. And I think what that has basically led to is, as soon as Airbnb, or whatever you want to call it, the short-term rental kind of industry started booming, it seemed to make sense that a lot of residents or people who maybe have property in Newburyport would then use them as short-term rentals. What had happened in 2019, the state actually created a registry and actually started taxing for the state, and created legislation to do that. So that started in 2019 under Governor Baker. And at that point, there was actually now kind of a directory of who's registered. At that same time, if you look at zoning laws that every municipality has, Newburyport, in our table of use, we never defined a use for short-term rentals. So does that mean it's illegal? It's all on how you interpret or say. And during the debate, I learned that you can't really say it's illegal. It's just not a defined use for the city. So we actually went through, probably 3 years ago, a short-term rental zoning proposal came before the council. It actually got moved and pushed to the next term because we just couldn't get consensus. So in the next term, worked on it some more, and it actually ended up not passing, which was a big disappointment to many people. But any zoning needs 8 out of 11 councilors, and this one, unfortunately, only had 7 councilors in favor. I was one of the ones that voted against it. So I know I did take some heat from some of the residents who were a little disappointed that, okay, now we don't have anything to kind of regulate short-term rentals. The problem is, and what I found is the proposed zoning was really just saying that you have to be an owner that is in the resident, or it has to be your primary home. So for you to do a short-term rental and, you know, it's your primary home, and if you go away, then you could kind of do a short-term rental on it. And, you know, the intention is not to have these buildings bought up by investors and turn them all into short-term rentals. I understand that, but I do think there's a better way that that can be done to support anyone who does maybe have a second home and be able to use that for some source of income. But what was before us wasn't quite working for me. Many residents that spoke out, though, were really upset with a few instances in their neighborhood where they felt like the people who were renting were disrespectful of the community, or they said that, you know, they would have loud parties. They would be, what were some of the things, blocking driveways, because, you know, we have very tight neighborhoods. So I heard what residents had to say, but to me, it really became more about how can we create regulations that if there is something going on, they could just call up and tell the police, or just, you know, they need to kind of, I would say they need to report them, and nobody did. So I feel like we need to, it's not going away. We do have a counselor that will be introducing a brand new, I think, ordinance proposed for our zoning for short-term rentals. And I look forward to seeing it, because I think they really listened to what the concerns were from the 4 of us that didn't allow for it. And let's hope we get 8 people to support it, at least, ideally 11. But I do think it does need some regulations, but I think it was just too tight the way it was before.
And that sounds similar to something that's going on in Salem as well. I think they're going through something very similar.
And Boston banned short-term rentals. I didn't know
that right?
that. Yeah. Because the other argument is it takes away from long-term rentals. And I won't lie about that. That does, I hear that, you know, people can't come to Newburyport and do rentals. There's not very many rental properties. So there's got to be this balance of allowing short-term rentals to meet maybe the need of a visitor to come to the city, since we don't have hotels. But then how do you balance that with affordable housing? How do you balance that with having places for people to come live and work in our city? It's not easy.
I think affordable housing, we're going to have to save that for another day, because that will take up a whole interview.
Yes.
Is there anything else you'd like to mention before we conclude this?
I think my last piece is I use short-term rentals, and I felt like it was disingenuous of me to use them in other communities, but then say that not in my community. And I think that that's the one thing, even in public comments, some people said, you know, I don't want it in our city, but I do use them when I go visit other places. And a part of me just pauses to understand, why do we say that? Is it because we don't like, and during public comment, I would hear things like, well, I like to know my neighbors. I like to know my environment. It's weird having strangers come and go. And so it really makes me think about the sense of, where is that coming from? Where is this fear of people coming from? So that's the last thing I think I'm just going to say on that. But I just felt like it was disingenuous to not.
I don't think so, because I know when they were putting wind turbines in Gloucester, everybody was in favor of them, in favor of the idea, until they said where they're going to be, and then people would say, "Oh no, not in my backyard."
Yes,
So
yes.
I think that's a similar, thinking. This has been great. I appreciate this, and I hope that we can do this from time to time.
Yes, I would love to. I really enjoy this. Thank you so much.